So in early 1491, war was declared on the Ottoman Empire, and Muscovite armies pounced on an unsuspecting Ottoman army near the fort of Azov. My name is Quagersall. Welcome to EU4. Today we're going to be exploring the updated and expanded new mission tree for Muscovy and Russia. We could taking Muscovy from this to this. Hopefully, we'll be able to get the Triple Emperor achievement in a later video if you guys are interested in seeing that. If you want to see another video in which I tried to get the Double Emperor achievement, which it wasn't really an achievement at the time, check out this video where I formed Ireland and became the Emperor of China. Now, I've heard a lot of speculation on the best way to get this achievement. Some say you should start in the HRE like Austria, get the HRE, then form Russia, then get China. And others say you should start with someone like Oirat, get China, then form Russia, then get the HRE. What do you think? Tell me in the comments down below. Anyways, let's jump in and get started. For 2 centuries, the Tartar yoke has laid heavy over the lands of Russia, but since the crushing defeat of the Golden Horde at the hands of the Timurid armies, their empire has fractured into a number of successor states. The Muscovites have made good use of this power vacuum, expanding their control over the other principalities rapidly through both cunning and use of military resources. Moscow is not the only strong state with interest in the Russian region, however. In the north, the Republic of Novgorod has colonized much of the White Sea coastline, and to the west, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and Kingdom of Poland are doing what they can to assume the leadership of all Russians. This is the world Vasily II was thrust into upon his assumption of the mantle of the Grand Principality of Muscovy in 1424. After nearly 20 years of his reign and many hardships overcame, he decided it was time to throw off the Tartar yoke and assert full independence for Muscovy. At the same time, several lower nobles coveted the rich lands of the north in Novgorod, and Vasily knew that he must defeat them if he wished to one day rule all of Russia. So in late 1444, the call for mercenaries went out, and by early 1445, the armies of Muscovy were engaged against both the Great Horde and the Novgorodians. The initial thrusts into both nations went quite well, and by the later part of the year, Muscovite forces had laid siege to Sari and Astrakhan in the south, and had captured Novgorod in the north. Then in December, a small army of conspirators led by Dmitry Shemyaka captured Vasily and forced him into exile, but not before blinding him in an effort to render him unfit to ever return to the reign over Muscovy again. Dmitry Shemyaka Rurikovich was the second son of Yuri of Zvenogorod and first cousin to Vasily II. His claim to the throne came from their grandfather, who had set Dmitry's father higher than Vasily in the line of succession, and in Dmitry's eyes, and those of his supporters, this means he should be the Grand Naze of Muscovy over Vasily. And as he had enforced that view by right of arms, many Muscovite nobles decided to go along with Dmitry's rule. For now. Upon taking over, Dmitry set about vigorously prosecuting the 2 wars he had inherited. The Great Horde was the first to succumb to the Muscovite armies. After the capture of both Sari and Astrakhan, and with the crushing defeat of about half of the Tartar forces in a disastrous counterattack in December 1446, a peace treaty was signed, both ending the Tartar yoke and ceding to Muscovy a strip of land from Tambov to Astrakhan along the Volga River to the Caspian Sea. The Novgorodians held out about 6 months longer, but by June were compelled to accept a humiliating peace treaty that would see them give up not only their capital, but also their major seaport of Neva. And so less than 2 years into Dmitry's reign, he had secured access from the Baltics to the Caspian and defeated 2 of Muscovy's greatest rivals. He then struck out on the first conflict wholly of his own making, in which he attacked the errant duchies of Tver and Ryazan, who had banded together and refused to acknowledge Dmitry as their rightful ruler. Even as this conflict raged, several powerful nobles across the realm, in concert with members of the Orthodox Church, would conspire to overturn Dmitry's rule and return Vasily II to the throne in February 1448. Henceforth known as Vasily the Blind, the former and again ruler of Muscovy had raised an army to take down his cousin, and in due course, the 2 armies raged outside Moscow in May 1448. Defeated, the armies of Dmitry would retreat south to Kaluga, and Dmitry himself was captured on June 4th. Vasily decided that now that he was back in power, the only recourse would be to execute his cousin and his cousin's son in order to avert future power struggles. In July of that same year, Vasily brought to heel the rebellious dukes of Tver and Ryazan, both of whom had declared their intention to return to the state of autonomous vassalage to Muscovy under Vasily, but instead Vasily had decided to demand their full submittance to the crown, possibly as a way to curtail the ambitions of any other of the dukes and other small states in the area. Over the next few years, Vasily would work to pay back loans and recover from a string of external and internal wars. The last few supporters Dmitry laid down their arms in 1450, and besides one small attack south to take some land from Gazimuk, the armies of Muscovy would lay dormant for over a decade. In 1459, however, Vasily authorized a renewed attack on the Great Horde. His nobles feared that the growing power of the Great Horde's alliances would eventually see the Tatar yoke reasserted over Russian lands. So in December, Muscovite armies marched south into the Great Horde and east into the Great Horde's greatest ally, of Uzbek. In July 1462, after having captured the Uzbekian capital and forcing them to abandon the Great Horde as an ally, the Muscovite forced an onerous peace deal on the Great Horde, annexing the entire rest of their nation along with half of their vassal of Gazimuk, more than doubling the size of Muscovite holdings south of Tambov. Following this conflict, the state of Circassia was re-established now as a vassal of Muscovy. Astrakhan was expanded, and Gazimuk's leaders swore fealty to Moscow. Vasily immediately authorized his armies in the south to further attack and conquer the small state of Avaria into Gazimuk to further cement their loyalties. The Muscovites could now count on at least one strong border against their enemies, in the form of the Caucasus Mountains in the south. Back home, Vasily had dealt with another small pretender rebellion and the possibility of a coup from an overly influential Orthodox Church. He needed further conflicts, and especially victorious conflicts, to further cement his reign. So in December 1463, he attacked Imereti in the name of his subject Circassia. Unfortunately, Vasily would be unable to end this war before passing away in March 1465, leaving the realm to his son, Ivan III. Ivan III Veliki Rurukhovich came to power on March 29, 1465, at the age of 25. One of his first acts was to secure a peace deal that would see his Circassian subjects gain access to the Black Sea and the lower Crimean Peninsula. Ivan fancied himself a Renaissance man and spent a large portion of his time focusing on boosting Muscovy's infrastructure and economy. However, he, like his fathers before him, was also a warrior, and in July 1465, he authorized an attack against Novgorod just a few months into his reign. This second clash with the Novgorodians was an easy one for Muscovy, as the Danish had already smashed the Novgorodian armies just a few months before. It was therefore simply a matter of bringing the lands of Novgorod under siege and demanding their acquiescence. With the fall of Arkhangelsk in March 1467, Novgorod was reduced to only one small province on the border with Lithuania, and Ivan's realm officially had access to the White Sea, along with the Black Sea. This pattern of pushing to the south, then pushing to the north, as his immediate predecessors had done, was the common refrain for Ivan. In the 1460s, he forced the Livonian Order to relinquish the island of Osel, in which he established a vassal of Estonia. Then in the south, he captured a small chunk of land on the Black Sea for his vassal of Circassia. Then in September 1470, he launched an assault on Kazan and their ally of Crimea. This fight would be a bit longer, but still not so much more difficult for the growing strength of the Muscovite army. Far away in Europe during this period, it was told that the Holy Roman Empire was having some leadership shakeups. The Palatinate had assumed the emperorship upon the death of the Duke of Burgundy. His lands, in a surprise move, had passed the control of the Kingdom of Scotland. In October 1472, Ivan secured access to the Black Sea directly for Muscovy in a peace deal with the Crimeans, and pushed back the Kazan at the same time. He immediately followed this attack with further attacks on the Livonian Order in support of his vassal in Estonia. These were sideshows, however, in preparation for Ivan's major attack against the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in February 1477. Amassing mercenaries and plunging deep into the heart of Lithuania, Muscovite armies had captured the Lithuanian capital of Vilnius and even the Polish capital of Warsaw by the middle of 1479. The war dragged on for 5 long years, but in early 1482, the Polish finally surrendered and Ivan carved out 3 vassal domains from Lithuanian lands in the peace treaty, his empire now piercing like a dagger all the way to Kiev. Ivan's reign lasted until 1488. During this time, he boosted Russia's economy to vast new heights, repaired the relationship with the Orthodox Church and his other estates, and continued to expand the nation's borders. However, a lack of a legitimate heir always plagued him. Finally, in August 1485, Ivan gave up on waiting for a son. and decided to legitimize his daughter as his heir. In late 1487, Ivan launched conflicts to destroy the last remnants of the Crimeans and push back against the Kazani horde to the east once again. He hoped to enjoy the fruits of these conquests back home with his family by Christmas in 1488. However, it was not to be so, and in September 1488, he died in the field, and the throne passed to his young daughter, Catherine Rarukovic. Sometimes styled Catherine the Magnificent, and not to be confused with the later Catherine the Great, Catherine came to power at the tender age of 16 on September 25th, 1488. True to form in the harshly patriarchal Grand Principality of Muscovy at the time, a major pretender rebel army attempted to oust her as soon as she took office. However, loyal armies put down this revolt quickly, and Catherine began what would be a long and fruitful, if not uniquely eventful, reign as the Grand Knyazhina. In the age of Renaissance men, Catherine was a true Renaissance woman. Known to be a patron of the arts, a high scholar, and a shrewd politician, Catherine also had a keen mind for military tactics. She had given birth to her first child with the powerful noble Vasily Bushenki just weeks prior to her ascension, and they decided to name the child Vasily as well, after both his father and several of Catherine's ancestors. Catherine, who found herself in charge of not only Muscovy, but also two ongoing conflicts, quickly rose to the station. In May 1489, she accepted the final center of Crimea, and later in September 1490, Kazan would surrender, and Catherine would force upon them to give up all but a small portion of their land on the border with the Nogai horde. As a bulwark against the now bordering Uzbek, Catherine established the vassal state of Bashkiria shortly after this peace deal, then settled in to deal with her new largest problem. During the confusion following the death of her father and the wars with Crimea and Kazan, the Ottomans had declared their support for the independence of the Astrakhan state. This could not be allowed to stand, so in early 1491, war was declared on the Ottoman Empire, and Muscovite armies pounced on an unsuspecting Ottoman army near the fort of Azov. Catherine had placed her husband in charge of the armies engaging with the Ottomans. While a powerful noble and well-respected, this put him in grave danger throughout the conflict. The attack plan against the Ottomans was twofold. In the south, the Grand Knays authorized an assault on the Ottoman fortress of Trebizond in September 1491, even as another Muscovite army, consisting of mostly vassal state forces, marched into the Balkans. Luckily, the Ottomans decided to push forces in the Balkans with the bulk of their troops, which gave the Muscovites time to raise additional troops back home and capture the additional Ottoman fortress on the Black Sea, Sinop, in early 1492. While Catherine's stated purpose for her husband leading the troops against the Ottomans was that he was the best man for the job, many among her nobles balked at this, assuming the position was simply to afford her and her husband additional glory in the triumph over the Ottomans by having him in charge directly. Rumors were making rounds that a more sinister motive may be afoot, however, but these would not come to light until well after the conflict. In August 1493, Muscovite armies, reinforcing from the north, met those from Anatolia in Constantinople. The fall of the Ottoman capital city was heralded as a major undertaking, not just in Muscovy, but throughout Europe. The war wasn't over yet, as the Ottomans' fortress of Sinop had been recaptured, and there was no easy way to extradite the Muscovite troops. Vasily decided that the best route to get his armies out of the Ottoman Empire involved a circuitous one south and east through Anatolia to the lands of the Akyunlu, partially to help relieve pressure on the nominal Muscovite ally of Karakoyunlu. While this dangerous march was partially successful, in that it did force the Akyunlu out of the war and allow Muscovite armies to crush a large Ottoman force to relieve the fortress of Trebizond in early 1494. Unfortunately, the Karakoyunlu still accepted peace with the Ottomans in April. In September, with Ottoman forces threatening to recapture Constantinople, and neither Vasily or Catherine willing to commit more resources to the conflict, the Ottomans were approached with a peace deal. The main stipulations for the treaty were that the Ottomans would relinquish their territories on the Sea of Azov and their fortresses and lands on the eastern half of the Black Sea. Additionally, they would pay a large sum to help recoup Muscovite losses in the war, and would cease their support of the Astrakhanis. All in all, quite the accomplishment for Catherine and Vasily. With the dawning of 1495, Catherine shifted her focus to cleaning up her nation, recovering the economy, repaying wartime loans, working on the integration of the Astrakhanis, and seeking new alliances. In July, in something of a coup d'etat, she secured an alliance with the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, oddly, through contacts her husband had made in Constantinople. Emperor Karl VI of Bohemia was the Holy Roman Emperor, but he was also the exiled son of the Ottoman Emperor. The tale of his rise to prominence in the empire is unfortunately lost to time, but suffice to say, it hinged on his promise to the Holy Roman Empire to push back his father's own empire, who as of the late 1480s had conquered large parts of Hungary and were poised on the border ready to attack into Austria. Catherine somewhat reluctantly agreed to the alliance. A quote from her letter to the Holy Roman Emperor: "Despite the failure of the Catholic world to come to the aid of the Orthodox against the Ottomans 50 years ago, we the Muscovites, the true heirs of Rome, will do so now." That this grand alliance was formed between an Orthodox Nyajana and a Muslim Holy Roman Emperor in the face of a failure of Catholic rulers, and even that of the Pope himself, was seen in the 1490s as a powerful refutation of the supremacy of the Catholic Church, and possibly helped to push forward the Reformation early in the next century. Later in the decade, Catherine authorized a new wave of eastward expansion, with an assault on Nogai in September 1495, which resulted in the December 1498 peace treaty, reducing Nogai to a single area to the east of the Caspian Sea. Then, in early 1499, despite the fact that her husband had yet to return from the east, Catherine authorized a new wave of attacks into the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The fighting against Poland-Lithuania went well, and within a year, a majority of Lithuania, as well as Warsaw itself, were under siege by the Muscovite troops. It was around this time that the news from the east reached Catherine that her husband had been killed while leading troops against Chagatai during the Nogai War. In what many would later see as a false display, Catherine publicly mourned for her husband, but very quickly set in motion her plans. Claiming to be so stricken with grief that she could no longer go on as a leader of the nation, many of her nobles thought she should abdicate in favor of her son, Vasily. However, Catherine presented an alternative. The 16-year-old Ivan, a young boy who had been raised by Catherine alongside her own son. A fairly distant relative, Ivan was in fact Catherine's third cousin, and his claim to the throne, especially with Vasily still living, was suspect. But such was the power Catherine wielded, that she would have Ivan on the throne by early May 1500. Catherine would not sink fully into the shadows afterwards, however, as she stayed on as the Dowager Queen through Ivan's reign, and even outlived him, exerting control over both Ivan and many of the other nobles of the realm at different times. It was even rumored that Catherine had groomed Ivan as a lover from a very young age. And although he would eventually take a wife, the few recorded correspondence between the two seemed to lend some credence to this disturbing revelation. In any case, at least outwardly, on April 30th, 1500, Ivan IV Rurikovic became the Grand Naze of the Principality of Muscovy, with his stepbrother Vasily remaining in the position of heir at the behest of their mother. Ivan IV Grozny Rurikovic, later styled Ivan the Terrible, came to power in the midst of a major conflict with the Polish. One of his first tasks, possibly an attempt to silence rumors about his mother, was to take a bride, Ludmila Kuchka, a 16-year-old Bohemian princess. Following the February 1501 sacking of Krakow, the Polish resistance collapsed. And while they resisted Ivan's peace deal for some time, this had more to do with its ambitions than any real hope of averting defeat. So, in October 1501, the Second Muscovite Commonwealth War came to the close, with large portions of Lithuanian lands coming under control of the Muscovites. Later, in March 1502, in what some have theorized was another duplicitous act of Catherine, the young Vasily, stepbrother and heir to Ivan, was found dead at 13 in his chambers, ostensibly of an illness, but rumored to be of poison. Ivan knew he must move to distract from this ordeal, and so he authorized an attack against the eastern hordes of Uzbek and Transoxiana in May 1502, securing minor territorial gains by August 1504, but serving to diplomatically cut ties between Transoxiana and the Ottomans, which was seen as a major triumph. Following this somewhat minor war, word came from Europe that the Protestant Reformation in Trier, the implications of which would be very important to Ivan's descendants nearly a century later. About a year later, in October 1505, Astrakhan was finally integrated fully into the Muscovite state, and in March 1506, Ivan decided his nation was ready for the long-awaited Second War with the Ottoman Empire, this time a joint action alongside the Bohemians. The fighting started well, with a major victory against the Ottoman army laying siege to the Circassian fort of Sinop, and then laying siege to the fort of Ankara themselves in September 1506. Back home on September 26th, the new heir to the Muscovite throne was born to Ivan and Ludmila. In a twist of irony that was becoming something of a tradition among the Rurikovic clan, they decided to name the boy Vasily, after his now deceased step-uncle. During the Second Ottoman War, Ivan was noted to have been very frustrated with the performance of the Bohemians. Even though they had sent one army to help capture Constantinople, they failed to defend their homelands and were threatening to leave the conflict once the Ottomans occupied Prague, which they were threatening to do. Ivan decided that the best course of action would be a quick exit to the war, and he settled on just forcing the Ottomans to relinquish their holdings in Moldavia in the peace deal. Shortly after the Ottoman War, possibly to distract his own nobles from their lackluster peace deal, Ivan began immediate preparations for another push to the east, declaring war shortly after the end of the peace treaty with the Transoceania in January 1510. The war was another fairly lengthy one, with the leaders of Transoceania forcing Muscovite armies to conquer the country fully before agreeing to a peace deal. Once they did, Muscovy took control of the entire eastern side of the Caspian Sea and the area over to and above the Aral Sea, a huge swath of Muslim lands that helped to fuel Ivan's propaganda back home. As the armies marched home, Ivan took stock. His armies had bested both the Ottomans and the eastern hordes. Next, his gaze fell upon the Danish, who were in possession of several former Novgorodian lands that Ivan's nobles coveted. To right this wrong, in November 1513, war was declared on the Kalmar Union and their allies in the Teutonic Order. Unlike previous wars, this war was fast. The Danes, the Teutonic Knights, and the Swedes all tried to resist, but fell before Muscovite and Bohemian armies. In late 1515, the peace treaty would see all of Finland transferred to the possession of Muscovy. In a shrewd move, Ivan declared Finland a kingdom, and he its king, separate of Muscovy but under a personal union. This would allow the area to function with its full strength and bind the nobles' allegiance much more efficiently than had Muscovy retained the land directly. Now Ivan's fury would be directed to the south against a former ally of Karakoyunlu. They would pay for their betrayal in the Ottoman War, and in a war from 1516 to 1518, they would be conquered and forced to give up large portions of borderlands near the Caucasus. Then, another war, from 1519 to 1521, Ivan focused his armies on the last major rival of Muscovy, who hadn't seen an attack since the beginning of his reign, Poland. This would net Muscovy the lands of Moldavia and Upper Lithuania, the duchies of Smolensk and Chernigov having been integrated over the previous few years. At the end of this conflict, with all of his major rivals defeated, Ivan declared the formation of the Tsardom of Russia, moving the capital to St. Petersburg in the process. In celebration, he ordered the construction of the Winter Palace to begin in February 1522. Ivan would not live to see the Winter Palace's completion, however, succumbing to an illness in June 1522, shortly after declaring another war on the Ottomans, this time with the goal of freeing the formerly Byzantine Orthodox lands in the Balkans. He was succeeded by his son, Ivan III. Just 16 when he rose to control the Tsardom, Ivan III immediately moved to tackle the Ottoman War raging to the south and continue his father's efforts to integrate Russian subjects. He also began encouraging the eastward expansion of the state, funding expeditions and colonization efforts on the Siberian frontier, policies that would continue for the next several czars. The reign of Ivan III was a flurry of successive wars. By the time the Ottomans had accepted a peace deal in which they would relinquish Constantinople and large portions of Greece, Ivan was well on the way to preparing his next conflict, a conquest of the majority of Sweden in November 1528. Once this land had been ceded to Finland, he turned around and broke through Transoceania into Yarkand. Then, in 1535, after striking from the Russian outpost of Memel, Ivan conquered the area under control of the Teutonic Order. Once a separate war with Zhang was concluded, he reorganized a new Teutonic Order as a vassal state. Then he fought a short war to keep the Polish down and took more land in Persia, before attacking the Oirat in 1538 and conquering a massive swath of land from them just 18 months later. It was here, in July 1539, that the Russians came in contact with the Ming for the first time. But those conflicts will have to be saved for another video. Let me know if you want to see a part 2 down below. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Wait, why is there an Osmanoglu on the Bohemian throne. He's Sunni and Turkish. He's the same dynasty as the Ottomans. What the fuck? And Catherine began what would be a long and fruitful, if not uniquely eventful, reign as the Grand
Niagina.
A 656? But I was gonna make Catherine my amazing ruler for this run. Ah, screw it. I'll find some way to figure it out. I can't pass up a 656. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. How about checking out one of the other videos on the screen? Leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you want to see more. It really helps out the channel. Comment down below with other videos you'd like to see, or head on over to the Discord. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.